No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
Bismillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sultan Bayezid I ruled from 751 to 805 after Hijrah, which corresponds to 1349 to 1402 CE. Sultan Bayezid was a very special individual and figure, and he had to endure tremendous challenges during his reign. Not only did he have to face the Crusaders, but he also had to face the Mongols, the Tatar. And because he had to fight on two different fronts, the European front, the Asian front, and he had to travel very quickly between Anatolia and the Balkans, he was given the nickname Yildirim, which means thunderbolt, or in Arabic would say maybe a sa'iqa. And he fought these two huge major forces and political players at that time, the Crusaders on the European side, and what we would consider the Islamicized Mongols or the Tatar in the East. So we know that if you remember the history of the Mongols, the Tatar, they ravaged much of the Muslim world and they decimated much of the Muslim world, and they destroyed and they conquered. But many of them, because they didn't have a solid aqidah, they didn't have a solid foundation from their deen perspective, they adopted many of the religious ideas and philosophies of the places that they conquered. So originally they adopted many of the Christian ideas. So they adopted many Christian ideologies. They married into some Christians, and they had that idea. So it was almost like Christianized Tatar. And then you had those that adopted Islam, or they mingled with the Muslims, and they adopted a lot of the Muslim ideas, and they became almost the Islamicized Tatar. And this was the force, the Islamicized Tatar, you could say, that Bayezid was facing in the East, and in the West he was facing the Crusaders. The Crusaders came up with an international alliance to confront the Ottoman state. So Sigismund of the King of Hungary and Pope Boniface IX made an urgent call to create a European alliance. And this alliance was comprised of France, of Germany, England, Scotland, Switzerland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and many Italian territories. The Crusader army totaled almost 120,000. And in the year 1396 CE, which corresponds to 800 after Hijrah, the chiefs or the leaders, they sent this army. Now the leader of Hungary, he disagreed, or some of the chiefs of Hungary, they disagreed with Sigismund for when they should attack. So there was a disagreement amongst them, amongst this Crusader army, of when they should send this attack against the Ottomans. Sigismund, he wanted to wait until the Ottomans attack. So he wanted to wait first, whereas they wanted, some of his other chiefs and leaders, they actually wanted to attack before the Ottomans would to attack. And so they advanced to the river Danube until they reached Nicopolis, south of the Balkans, and they surrounded it. And it seemed that the Ottomans were going to become overcome, that they would lose. And then all of a sudden, Bayezid appears with 100,000 well-equipped, well-trained soldiers to destroy and defeat the crusading army. And many of their leaders were captured, many of their nobles were captured, many French noblemen were captured, for example. And afterwards, Sultan Bayezid, he did accept the fidya, ransom, for many of their leaders. And many of the people who were captured, they included people like Count de Nefre, and he was a leader of his people. But he made a very interesting statement when he was released. He said, "Because you released me, I vow never to fight you again." So check this out. He's obviously being grateful. He's saying, "I'm never going to fight you again." And Sultan Bayezid has a very special answer to this. This is an interesting answer I want us to pay attention to. He says, "I allow you to break your vow." So here he's making, the count is making a vow never to fight him again, but he's saying, "I allow you to break your vow in case you want to return to fight against me, as there's nothing more beloved to me than fighting all the Crusaders in Europe and defeating them." So he's showing absolute confidence. Like Bayezid, even though he has rushed back to the European front, as I mentioned before, going back between like a thunderbolt, going back between the European and Asian side. He says, if you want to come back and break your vow, you can do that, because there's no more pleasure. I don't get any more pleasure than defeating you. Bayezid is also one of the Ottoman leaders that set the stage for the conquest of Constantinople, present-day Istanbul. He started to exert a high amount of pressure on the Byzantine emperor. And after exerting a lot of pressure on the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, he was able to get some concessions for the Muslim community. Now, remember, the Ottomans had such a strong presence of Islam within that area. So even though they had not officially captured, they did not conquer Istanbul at that time, or Constantinople at that time, many people were becoming Muslim. Many people were still within the walls of Constantinople. There were people who were Muslim. So he was able to pressure the Byzantine emperor to have a Muslim judge, so a person who would be able to make judgments for the Muslims in that area. And he was able to, and by extension, of course, establish an Islamic court system for the Muslims, to have a masjid built, and actually to have 700 houses assigned for the Muslim community. So subhanAllah, even though there wasn't a liberation there, there was the seeds of Islam was planted there. And you could start hearing the adhan. So imagine that even though that land is not conquered yet, or this area is not conquered, that you are starting to hear the adhan because of the presence of Muslims within there. It's almost like setting the stage. That call of adhan is almost calling not only people for salah, right? Hayya ala salah, but hayya al falah. Eventually goodness is going to come into that land. They also were able to get, Sultan Bayezid was able to get the Byzantine emperor to surrender half the borough of Galatin, where they were able to station about 60,000 Ottoman forces. And they were also able to get a tax, a regular tax that would be paid to the Ottoman state. Now, soon afterwards, here, Bayezid, he doesn't stop. He's a thunderbolt. He's continuing forward. There's a victory, there's a battle that takes place in Nicopolis. And what this does, this battle and this victory for the Ottomans, it establishes rule in the Balkans. And so they have rule over Bosnia and Bulgaria. Again, now, look at the expansion here on the west, but it's very difficult to fight on two fronts. And Timur Leng, who was leading the Mongols, is starting to pressure from the east. So from the Asian side, there's a big pressure from Timur Leng to take more territory and pressure the Ottoman state. Timur Leng was a king of Khorasan, which is based in Samarkand, and he was known to have this fearless and strong army. And he was able to actually control much of the Islamic world, the Muslim world. And his army spread in Asia, so you have it spreading from Delhi, Damascus, the Ural Sea, the Arabian Gulf, Fars and areas of Iran, Persia, Armenia, the highlands, 2 rivers between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, areas of Russia. So Timur-Lenk actually was able to have these vast areas of land, conquer vast areas of the Islamic world. And this is around the time of 1369 CE. Now, they were bound to clash. So Bayezid and Timur-Lenk are bound to face off. And Bayezid is obviously, his resources are split between these 2 fronts, and his focus is split between these 2 fronts. And whereas Timur-Lenk has to just focus on one, he doesn't have to worry about Crusaders, and the Crusaders don't have to worry about the Mongols. And oftentimes they would be pleased with one another. The Crusaders and the Tatar would be pleased with one another because they had a common focus of their military efforts. Because it's not like they're facing each other now. It's like they're trying to close in within this this Muslim rule. And there are several reasons why Bayezid and Timur-Lenk had to face off. One is that many of the Muslims who had lost their country and territories from Iraq, they joined Bayezid and they sought help from Bayezid. And similarly, many of the people who were conquered in the area of Asia Minor, they sought help. So these are people who have the Tatar heritage and are linked to the Tatar. They sought help from Timur-Lenk. So you have 2 people from conquered lands going to essentially, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. And they're going to these opposite leaders to seek help, to maybe perhaps regain their land or get revenge. The Christians, they were urging Timur-Lenk to attack and destroy Bayezid. So as I mentioned, there was this pseudo-alliance between the Christians and the Tatar. And there was also some heated exchanges between Timur-Lenk and Bayezid. They had these letters that they exchanged amongst themselves that really caused a lot of tension to build up between the 2. Now, Bayezid met near Ankara Timur-Lenk, who came with a huge army. So Bayezid came with a great army himself, 120,000 soldiers. But Timur-Lenk came with an even greater army, and in Ankara in the year 804 after Hijrah, which corresponds to about 1402 CE, they clashed in what would be a very defining battle for the Ottoman Empire, because the Mongols, they won. They actually defeated them very badly, to the extent where they actually captured Sultan Bayezid, and he remained detained until his death the following year. Now, why was he defeated in such a great manner? Well, firstly, the rashness of how Bayezid had to operate, or how he had to act. It was not a suitable place to camp where he went. And so many of the soldiers died due to thirst because it was the summertime and there was drought conditions. And they were vastly outnumbered. So you're talking about 120,000 soldiers versus 800,000. Okay, so an army of 120,000 versus an army of 800,000. So they're vastly outnumbered. And what also happened, which really undermined the army of Bayezid, is that many of the former Tatar soldiers, many of the people who had allegiances or background or history with the Mongols, they defected to the Mongols, and they almost act like a fifth column against the Ottoman Empire. Now, when the European countries heard of this defeat in the West, they were so pleased. They couldn't have been more elated. And the King of England and France and Spain and the Byzantine Emperor of Constantinople all congratulated Timur-Lenk. And so this is something to keep in mind, is that when the enemies of Muslims are elated with what you do, then whose side are you really on? Like if the enemies of people who are trying to harm and conquer the Muslim lands are elated with what you do, then perhaps you need to reevaluate what side of the fence you are on. And so after the defeat of Timur, when Bayezid, Timur Leng, he was able to seize areas as Znik and Brusa, and also these were actually under the control of Muslims, of the Ottomans. So he was able to control and seize more territory. But in addition to that, what he did was he took over the area of Izmir, which was actually controlled by the Knights Roads of St. John. And this was actually controlled by Christians, and he did this for political reasons because he wanted to justify his position before Muslims. So he wanted to do something in front of the greater community of Muslims to get a better view of himself in the court of public opinion. And after this great defeat, so what was more, I would say, devastating to the Ottoman Empire than this defeat with Timur Lenk was what occurred afterwards. What occurred afterwards? So they are defeated on a battlefield, a great defeat. But there is something that's even worse than being defeated by an external enemy, and that is defeating within yourself, being defeated, losing heart, losing the unity within yourselves. And what happened for the next 10 years was a moment in history which almost completely ended Dawlat al-Uthmaniyya. It almost completely caused the Ottoman Empire to come to an end. And that was a period of an entire decade of civil war within the Ottoman Empire. So between the year of 806 to 816 after Hijri, which corresponds to 1403 to 1413 CE, the five sons of Bayezid, he had five sons, and one of them, Mustafa, was killed during the battle against Timur Lenk. Musa was captured. And then you had Suleiman, Isa, and Muhammad. And so Suleiman, he took control over Edirne. Isa took over Brusa, and they started fighting with each other. They were locked in a civil war. And Timur Lenk saw this. He saw the sons of Bayezid fighting amongst each other. And what did he do in response to this? So obviously, he's intelligent. He releases Musa, one of the sons. Why? Because he wants to add more fitna amongst them. He wants to cause more division amongst them. So even though he was captured and they could have kept him in prison, he released it so he could cause more fitna amongst them, because there was this lack of unity. The sons of Bayezid were fighting with each other over territory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells us in Surah Al-Ankabut, do people think that they will be left alone because they say we believe? No, and will not be, and that they will not be tested. No, they will not do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will indeed test them, those who were before them, as He tested those before them. So subhanAllah, this was a big test. This was a big test. This was a big fitna for the Ottoman Empire. Here they were defeated, this crushing blow, this magnanimous, like this great personality, Sultan Bayezid, gets captured. He dies a year later in captivity. And then you have the sons of this great Sultan fighting amongst each other for pieces of this Ottoman Empire, which is being taken over externally, and now it's fracturing internally. So there's these fractures internally, and externally it's very vulnerable. Then out of almost the brink of destruction comes the savior of the Ottoman Empire. And some actually call him the second founder of Dawlat al-Uthmaniyya. Okay, so remember, they call Uthman, right, the founder. That's what the Ottoman Empire is named after. But they call this Sultan Muhammad Jalabi Sultan Mehmed I, one of the sons of Bayezid, the second founder of the Ottoman Empire. He was born in the year 781 after Hijri, which corresponded to 1379 CE. He was a very strong personality, both physically and through his character. He was active. He was known to be a wrestler. He partook himself in 24 battles. And he had so many injuries. Some of the narrations say that he had 40 wounds that he had sustained through the course of his battles. He was the one that was able to end the civil war. So a civil war nearly took down the Ottoman Empire, because externally, think about it, they were so strong. Like, even though they had this defeat from Timur Leng and they were taking on the Crusaders, they still had a very vibrant empire and a very strong empire, and they weren't erased. You're talking about them expanding European front, Asian front, two formidable enemies, and they're able to take them both of these enemies on. It was the civil war that they had that almost completely destroyed them. This internal turmoil that completely destroyed them. So before you thought that the greatest enemy for the Avengers were themselves. Okay, they had that civil war. Okay, and it's not even a real story. The civil war, that goes to show you, that's a good actually illustration to show you, if you're strong and you're formidable and you're resilient against all these external enemies, it's your own selves that can be your greatest threat. So he was able to end the civil war amongst his brothers. He was known to be somebody who was very generous. He was somebody who paid homage to the Abbasid Khalifa at that time. He sent gifts to the Emir of Mecca to be distributed amongst the poor in Mecca. And he started to invest in rebuilding the state and to reestablish the infrastructure. What he did was on many fronts. The way that he was very strategic. So here you have consolidating power amongst his own family. He's developing peace treaties. So he had a peace treaty with the Byzantine emperor, and he tried to get him to become an ally. And he gave up, in order to do that, he had to give up some cities along the Black Sea. He made peace with Venice. He subdued revolutions within his own empire in Europe and Asia. He reclaimed actually some of the territories that was lost to Timur Leng. Now, how were they able to bounce back? How was the Ottoman Empire able to bounce back? That's something that should be studied and that should be reflected upon. And it would be, I think, a good lesson for leaders in the Muslim community to really reflect upon some of the key aspects of how this community or this empire, which was ravaged externally, started to fracture internally with divisions to the point where their brother is literally fighting and killing brother. How were they able to bounce back from this brink of destruction? Well, the scholars, when they study this and they look at why were they able to do that, why were they so resilient, they look at it from the perspective, or they are able to identify that the institutions and the system that the Ottomans had established. So remember, during the time of Orhan, he established the institution. So Uthman came up with the constitution, the values, the core values, the ideology of how this empire should be built. Okay, then Orhan took it to the next level by making institutions that are reflective of that. And these institutions, they're producing military men, they're producing thinkers, they're producing educators, they're producing politicians. This is what this education system is doing. It's producing these people, so it's not relegated by a single individual. Like, it's not dependent. The whole dependency of the empire is not on a single human being or a personality. Okay, the ideals, the core values of this society is actually upheld and supported by institutions and the infrastructure that houses these institutions. Okay. So this was one of the key reasons why the Ottoman Empire was able to bounce back so quickly. So even though they had this brief internal turmoil and civil war, and they had this chaos occurring, what gave them that ability to bounce back is the fact that they had invested so much in these institutions. It wasn't a single person. So just because they lost Bayezid doesn't mean now that the whole empire is going to collapse. Just because they have now this family fighting amongst each other. Eventually, of course, that was a key element for them to be able to become unified and to overcome the civil war, is that Sultan Muhammad Jalabi had to step up and unite there by force, the armies and so forth. But the armies, the people, the scholars, the military, the fact that they had these institutions that they could rely upon that would keep people ideologically united, it was very important. That was the key element, is that when you have a unified purpose, you can always renew your intention. You can always renew the existential purpose of the Ottoman Empire, because that's like been ingrained in your whole education system. So for example, if our education system was based on the fact that we're learning science, math, physics, anything, and religious sciences, because we're doing all of these things to serve, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter what happens, you go back to those roots. So you can go through chaos, you can go, and then you can remember, why was I doing this thing in the first place? And you can go back to those roots, and it's easier to unite with people who have a core belief in those types of ideas. Now, one of the fitnah that Sultan Muhammad had to face was the fitnah of Shaykh Badraddin. And now, this was a person who around the years of 1359 to 1420, he exerted a lot of influence, and he was actually a qadi, he was a judge in the army of Sultan Muhammad's brother Musa. And he started this corrupt movement where he started to distort parts of the deen. So essentially, he's somebody who started off as a sheikh, someone who had given the position as a qadi, but he starts his own corrupted movement, okay? And he came up with different ideas of how he wanted to modify Islam. He wanted to make it equal inheritance between men and women. He wanted to say that there's no differences in any of the religions, so there's no differences between Muslims and non-Muslims. And when somebody says that actually is intolerance, because what they're saying is that I'm coming up with my own religion now that you have to follow. Oftentimes people can conflate saying that, hey, when you say, hey, we're all the same, your religion is the same as my religion. No, we can respect one another, and we can have a cordial relationship with one another. And we can be just with one another, and we can have very different ideas of what our purpose in life is. We can have completely different ideas about deen. That's fine. When people say we're all the same, what you're actually saying is that I'm coming up with a new religion that I want everybody to follow. Whereas saying that I'm different and you're different, but let's just respect each other's differences, and that's okay if we're different. It's okay. It's okay to have a completely different idea about akhirah. You can have a different idea. I may not believe that's the truth. You may not believe I follow the truth. But tolerance doesn't mean uniformity. Okay? We can sometimes conflate unity and unity. You can have a unified society that has different belief systems, right? But you don't have to have it uniform. We're the same. We have to believe the same. So that's just on a size of caveat, because a lot of times these types of ideas, they do come up under the guise of a person trying to say that they're so tolerant and that this is how we're going to bring peace and how we're going to avoid conflict, and hey man, let's just all get along, we're all the same, everything's the same. No, what you're saying is, hey man, I got this new religion and you got to follow this or else you're intolerant, man. That's basically what people are saying, when they're saying, hey, we're all the same. Okay, no, it's okay to be different. Okay, but here he begins this movement saying that there's no differences. He was supported by people like Bir, Khalija, Mustafa, and Tor Kamal. They had an aim to take over the Ottoman Empire. And because of the recent turmoil that the empire endured, they thought this was their chance. And he stated that I will revolt until I take control of the world with my beliefs. I will divide the world among my followers with the power of knowledge and the secret of monotheism. I will cancel the laws of the people of traditions and their movement, and I will make some prohibitions lawful. SubhanAllah, these words by Shaykh Badraddin, this corrupted, quote-unquote, Shaykh, this encapsulates what I just said, that they're not trying to, it sounds sometimes very nice to say that there's no difference between religion, but what he's saying, if you look at his words, he's saying, actually, this is my attempt to get power by saying, hey, we're all the same, so who should I follow? Well, you know what, man, I got some great writings that you can follow, and then they just plagiarize. I'll take some stuff from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I'll take some stuff for the Christians, and I'll take some Mongolian sayings, and I'll mix them up, but everyone's just got to follow me because I'm the new guy in charge. I'm the head chief in charge now. That's sometimes, people get deluded. At the end of the day, people get deluded when people come up sometimes with these seemingly nice and tolerant ideas and sayings and so forth. Okay, similarly with some of the modern secular leaders that came afterwards that really repressed Muslims. So they'll repress anything like traditional religion, Islam, Christianity. They'll repress that. So instead of the Islamic approach is very different. So for example, if we look at how the Khulafa Rashidun, and we looked at the Muslim leaders who were actually trying to follow the fiqh of Islam, the understanding, the jurisprudence and laws of Islam, when you look at their approach, it's very different because, hey, there are some overarching laws that if it's under Muslim rule, overarching laws that everybody needs to follow. But guess what? Okay, you identify yourself as Christian. You can actually have some laws from Christianity that you can use to judge yourselves. Okay, your Jewish community, you can have some laws from the Jewish community to judge yourself. And we're different. And guess what? Some of the laws that you will give permission to do because you ascribe to this religion will be different. It'll be maybe considered haram for me, but we're going to still allow you to do it. See, that's tolerance. That's tolerance. That allows a community to exist with their identity. To say that we have to be uniform, you're actually saying we have to erase everybody's identity, and you're trying to create a new identity for people. And oftentimes, and I've seen this by people who they try to appear to be very tolerant and very humanistic, they actually don't respect people's identity. They don't actually respect people's values. They actually try to call, everyone. You need to have it inclusive and uniform based upon our value system, and there's no regard whatsoever for that particular community's identity, for their values, and whatnot. Now, this corrupt Badraddin, he was supported by the Amir in Aflaq, which is in Romania, and he was supported both financially and militarily. So, again, an internal dispute funded and supported from external sources. Sultan Muhammad Jalabi, he was able to identify this threat within his empire. He was able to repel Badraddin to Dali Orman, which is present-day Bulgaria. And what happened, even though he was able to repel him, what started to occur was that Badraddin started getting more and more support from European sources. And his followers actually reached 7,000 to 8,000 members. So it became such a threat, and it became such a disturbance within the empire. Sheikh Muhammad Jalabi, or Sultan Muhammad Jalabi, he took it upon himself to personally lead an army to defeat him at Dali Orman, and he made a base from Caesar, Greece, to attack him from. And Badraddin, he tried to escape, but the Sultan had secret members or spies that were able to infiltrate the army and the membership of Badraddin, and they were able to find his location and capture him. Sultan, he faced Badraddin. So Badraddin was brought to Sultan Muhammad, and he was able to face him. And he asked him, "Why is your face pale?" And Badraddin said, "The sun, O leader, becomes yellow when sunset approaches." So he knew that his end of his time was near. And what happened afterwards is that they engaged in debate. They had the scholars of the Ottoman state engage in this open scientific, or this debate, Islamic jurisprudence debate in the legal court, and they were able to disprove a lot of the things that he was doing, and able to expose a lot of his fitnah, and so he was sentenced to death. Now, Sultan Muhammad, he would himself die in the year 824 after Hijrah, which corresponds to 1421 CE, in excuse me, the city of Edirne at the age of 43. And he nominated his son, Sultan Murad II, to be his successor. Now, Sultan Murad II, when he took over, he was 18 years old. 18 years old. One thing I find amazing of many of the sultans of the Ottoman Empire, and which I think we need to take a minute to pause to note. We need to take a minute. Let's pause. Put the brakes on for a second. Let's take a pause, because I think this is another really important thing. Check this out. How many of these sultans were so young when they took over? And how many of them were fighting at a young age, on the battlefield, and making like these huge decisions that had a tremendous effect on their empire? Like, we're talking about political decisions, we're talking about peace treaties, we're talking about military decisions, all of these things. How are they able to be so well equipped? Again, we got to go back to it, the Tarbiyah, the educational institution. It wasn't just one personality that came out of this chaotic conditions. And that's what sometimes we hope for, right? That a hero is going to come out of nowhere. We have such chaos, turmoil, trials, and tribulations. A hero will just come out produced by divine intervention. We need the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all things. Let's be clear. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us faculties, blessings, and the benefit of history to see how we can become successful. What we see is that from a young age, the society at large, and specifically the sultans, were given tarbiyah. They were able to benefit from these institutions, which truly reflected the noble ideas that this whole Ottoman Empire was created upon. Are we doing the same thing? We got to ask ourselves this question, a self-reflective question. Muslim community, we have Islamic schools, we have masajids, we have madrasas, we have, in the Muslim world, universities. Are we creating leaders, resilient leaders with the skills, with the tools to lead our communities? And do we embrace them, and do we give them responsibility at a young age? Do we test them with responsibility at the young age? Do we give them a chance to make mistakes and are compassionate with their mistakes and say, you know what, come, it's fine, and have confidence in the efforts that we've made? It's like, I've seen so many times that you put all these efforts and all these young, bright brothers and sisters coming out of these schools, yet you have zero confidence in them when they come out. Like you're not willing to give them responsibility, leadership roles within your community to help uplift your community. Perhaps maybe there is not as much confidence in the institutions that you establish. That's why maybe you don't have confidence in what is being produced. Maybe it's a self-reflective question that we need to reevaluate what we have accomplished with these institutions. And does it mean that we throw everything out? No, it means that we just make it better. We have to we have to ask ourselves these hard questions. To say I won't ask myself these hard questions is ignorance, is trying to stay deaf, dumb, and blind. To ask yourself shows growth, the ability to move your ego aside, to suppress your ego, and to be able to face mistakes and challenges and shortcomings and to address those. Because if you address those sincerely, then you have more confidence in what is produced from your efforts. Many of these sultans, subhanAllah, look at this. They take the leadership role at a young age, like a teenager. They take a lead, and they die very young. Many of them die in their 40s. Many of these sultans, think about it, they're dying in their 40s. They take rulership at a young age. How much time do you have for development? That means the development process must have been as soon as they're able to walk and learn, they're going through a process of tarbiyah. The environment around them is consistent with their institutions. Their family is consistent with the institutions. It's consistent with the community. And so they grow up in this highly supportive environment, which has a strong purpose and strong core values. And so when they reach the age of 17, 18, 16, 14, they have the ability now to take over, to lead, to blaze a new trail. And for the few decades that they work, they're able to accomplish more than people would accomplish in many lifetimes. It's something to think about. It's something to reflect about. Sultan Murad II takes over at the age of 18. He was known for his piety. He was known for his justice. He was known for his compassion. He stopped many of the rebellious movements conducted by his uncle Mustafa, who was actually supported by the Byzantine Emperor Emmanuel, and he laid siege to the city of Gallipoli, where he was laid siege upon at the city of Gallipoli to their attempt to try to remove him. And Sultan Murad II Athani, he was able to capture his uncle, and he was sentenced to death. There was many conspiracies that the emperor did against Sultan Murad when he was, and he sponsored his brother, which he appointed as the head of an army, and he attacked and they seized Nikia and Anatolia. But eventually Sultan Murad was able to defeat him, and he was able to attack Salonika in the year 833 after Hijrah, 1431 CE, and he was able to take over lands there. He reestablished rule in the Balkans. He was able to take over part of the province of Wallachia, Romania, and he was able to subjugate the Serbian king. He reinforced rule in Greece. He was able to liberate Albania in 834 after Hijrah, Hungary in 842 after Hijrah, which both of them there correspond to 1431 CE and 1438 CE. He was unable to liberate Belgrade, which is the capital of Serbia, and he faced this new Crusader alliance that was created in the year 846 after Hijra, which is 1442 CE. This was a alliance that came from Europe, approved by the Pope. It included Hungary, Poland, Serbia, Genoa, Venice, the Byzantine Empire, and parts of Italy. It had Czech, German armies. There was a Hungarian army as well. Commander John Hanyadi, who was also part of it. They were able to repel this Crusader army in 848 after Hijra, which is 1444 CE. The Ottomans forced them to have a peace treaty for 10 years. So this was a peace treaty that was supposed to last for 10 years. Serbia had surrendered, and they surrendered the province of Al-Aflaq, which is in Hungary, and the Crusaders also agreed to pay a ransom of 60, or actually they agreed to accept a ransom of 60,000 ducat for the release of his son-in-law, so Mahmud Shalabi. So Sultan Murad's son-in-law was captured, so they were able to have him released. And his son-in-law was actually one of the generals of general commanders of the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman army. They drafted this treaty in Ottoman Turkish and Hungarian, and both leaders swore by their holy books to honor this treaty. It was supposed to be, it was some major battles that took place, major territories that, exchanged hands. This was supposed to bring a lot of peace and stability in that area, and they both swore to that. Sultan Murad II, after this peace treaty was established, he returned to Anatolia. And soon after he returned, his son Ala died. And this actually affected him a lot. So personally, that affected him. And he desired actually to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in seclusion. So he had a desire to leave war and politics, leave the troubles and the burden of governance, and just go and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in seclusion, just become ibadullah. And what he does is he puts his son Muhammad in charge at the age of 14. So he makes him in charge now of the Ottoman Empire, and he travels to Magnesia, which is in Asia Minor, to go in seclusion and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, he could not do this for very long because word got out that he had transferred rulership to such a young son, 14 years old. So the Cardinal Cesarini, he calls for an abrogation of this peace treaty. Okay, so many of his aides, they say, let's dissolve this peace treaty, because he wanted to take advantage of the absence of Sultan Murad II. So he wanted to take advantage of that, and he wanted to take advantage of the fact that this new Sultan Muhammad II, that he's so young, 14 years old, so take advantage that he's in this position. So Pope Eugene IV approved of breaking the treaty. And as a result, they laid siege to the Bulgarian city of Varna, which was on the coast of the Black Sea. And this was actually the 5th crusade against the Ottoman Empire. So think about this. This is the 5th time. And when we talk about a crusade, we're talking about something that is approved by the Pope, that usually includes an alliance of both the Western and Eastern Christian empires. So the Byzantine Empire, and so you have like the Orthodox Orthodox Christians in the east, and you have the Catholics in the west, usually getting together. Many countries sending armies, leaders together in a coalition for a crusade. So this was the fifth time that this occurred. Again, breaking a treaty, creating this. You thought for a moment there, he had thought, Sultan Murad thought, okay, I have at least 10 years for peace. My son can grow into the role. I can take it easy. I can just worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they broke their treaty. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah At-Tawbah 10, with regard to a believer, the disbelievers respect not the ties either of kinship or of covenant. It is they who have transgressed all bounds. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already tells us in the Quran to expect and be prepared for things like that. So there was a call for Sultan Murad to return. He refused. He didn't want to leave ibadah. He didn't want to leave worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there was this Sultanate Shura Council in Edirne, and they addressed his son, Sultan Muhammad. He says, we are unable to repel the advance of the enemy unless your father assumes the Sultanate in your place. Send your father to confront the enemy, and you take rest. Then the Sultanate may be returned to you when this important matter is resolved. So this council is advising this young Sultan Muhammad, you got to tell your father to come back. We need your... You're cool, but we need your dad. Okay, we need the big guns for this one to repel this crusade. And once he comes back and he does that, then you can go. You can go back to being the Sultan. So Sultan Muhammad, think about this man, just like this young teenager, starts begging his father to return. And he sends him a very cool letter. He says to him, if I am the Badshah, then I order you to take command of your army. And if you are he, then come and defend your country. Subhanallah. So the way he articulates himself, it shows his training. It shows like this is, even though he's being belittled by these European leaders, 14-year-old, oh, cool, we're going to take over now. We're going to take advantage of the situation. Look at how he talks to his father, subhanAllah, like to try to convince him. All these senior leaders can't convince his father to come. So it's up to him now. Like the council is coming to him, like, we need your dad. We need your father to step up. So he says, okay, writes them, if I'm your Badshah, if I'm your leader, if I'm the Sultan, then I order you to take command of your army. Then you got to follow my orders. But if you're the Sultan, well, you got to take command of your army and defend your country. So subhanAllah, the way he words it is like he doesn't have a choice. He does. So Sultan Murad was convinced. He left his retreat and he led an army against this threat. He reached Edirne the same day as this Crusader army reaches. And in the second day, when they're facing this Crusader army, what they did is actually they took the treaty that they had signed and they put it on their lances. So the Ottoman army is taking this treaty that the Crusaders, that the Christians had broken, and they're holding it up on their lances above themselves, and they're carrying it. And so they were doing this so that the heavens and earth could be witnesses of the treason and aggression of the enemy that these Crusaders had done. And this actually instilled more zeal and courage in the Ottoman soldiers. Now, these two groups fought intensely. It was an intense fight. The Hungarian king, who actually one of the main violators of this treaty, Ladislas, he actually met Sultan Murad on the battlefield. They faced each other face to face. And Sultan Murad was actually able to kill him with a blow from his lance. So with his lance, he was they were both met on horseback, and Sultan Murad had a lance, and he was able to defeat him and strike him and kill him with his lance. And then the other members of the army, they came in and they killed, they finished the job, and then they raised this body of the king. And this actually was a very demoralizing thing for the crusading army. Then Sultan Murad, he returned back to his private seclusion in Magnesia. But then what ended up happening when he went is that in Edirne, many of the viziers, so many of the advisors, and an Inkishari group, so remember this was the specialized Janissary forces, they started to cause a rebellion and discord, and they tried to again take advantage that Sultan Muhammad II, who was still relatively young, he was 19 at this time, they were hoping to capture power. And then again, Sultan Murad had to return, and the Inkishari group, they submitted to him, to his authority, and he appointed for a brief period of time his son Muhammad II as the Emir of Magnesia and Anatolia until his death. So Sultan Murad actually, although he wanted to be in seclusion, although he wanted to just worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it was required for him, when duty called, essentially, he was there and he served on the throne until the last days of his life, and he continued with conquest and liberation. And guess what? He died in Edirne at the age of 47. And, he's buried in Muradia Mosque in Bursa. He was buried on a Jum'ah, and he left a legacy as well of building many institutions, many things that actually enriched Ottoman society, masajid, schools, palaces, and bridges during his rule. And then now again, Sultan Muhammad II comes to take over rulership. So imagine he took over rulership 3 times. This was the 3rd time. Sultan Muhammad II took over first at the age of 14. He was propped up into this position. And one would say, like, man, like, he can't catch a break. There's this, a whole crusade is launched. A whole crusade is launched because they think they could take advantage of that. And then he comes again, age of 19, and there's this internal turmoil. Okay, we can take over internally. Okay, young guy, we can take advantage of the situation. His father comes again to support him. 3rd time now, he takes over. Are they going to be able to mess with him? Are Crusaders going to be able to mess with Sultan Muhammad II? Are people going to be able to take advantage of Sultan Muhammad II? They tried twice. No. Because this time, Sultan Muhammad II is going to take it to them. Sultan Muhammad II, so Sultan Muhammad al-Thani, was none other than Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, the liberator of Constantinople. The one who would turn Constantinople to Istanbul. That was Sultan Muhammad. Think about what he went through. And to get somebody like that, think about the investment you make. This is time of self-reflection. Don't just take it as an inspirational story. Take some pragmatic lessons. Sometimes people need support. Not everybody hits the home run their first time at bat. They make mistakes. They falter. They get challenged. But his father came back twice to support him, to be there for him, to have his back. Do we have the backs of our young generation? Do we have the backs of those who have potential in our society? Do we even have each other's backs at all? Because if we do, I guarantee you that there's these people with talent and drive and ambition and capability within their ummah. They just need the support. They just need the support, because Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, when he came now to power, you're going to see a completely elevation, the culmination of efforts for hundreds and hundreds of years during the time of the Sahaba till his time. You would see the culmination of that effort manifest in the opening of Constantinople. And then you'll see the amazing story of how Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih was able to conquer a land that was deemed unconquerable. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us humble and keep us hungry. Remember, as always, we want to live by the Haqq, die by the Haqq, and just when you think life is stuck, tune in to Life Haqq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Watch Rise of the Ottomans only on the Life Haqq podcast, guaranteed to leave you changed through inspiration, information, and Iman elevation. For more clips and installments in the series, go to youtube.com/Dr. Sayed, and for more notifications and Iman boosting content, follow us on Twitter at @life_Haqq.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I look for protection from Allah.